This blog is somewhat about judgments, but not about being offended by judgments, more about unraveling some of them. We judge people all the time. We sort, we classify. I think it's just human. It's the start of a lot of science. But of course, deeper science is about questioning assumptions, and hopefully we as people also question our most immediate assumptions about people when we see them. I teach adults English as a second language, so my students are adult immigrants. Most of our students are from either Guatemala or Mexico, with the majority from Guatemala. There's a big difference between educational opportunities in those two countries. We expect most students from Mexico have a 6th grade education. However, we're relieved if someone from Guatemala has had that much education. It varies, of course. There are people, we've had students from Guatemala who've had university educations. Students can join our classes at any time. Last night, another small dark man was assigned to my class. This is determined by a speaking test, and I heard our test administrator, the woman who gives our tests, say, kind of as an aside, sort of to the student, sort of to nobody in particular, kind of talking to herself, that she would try him in this class, which indicates to me that she was not sure whether he belonged in my class or not. All kinds of things enter into skewed tests, most particularly test anxiety. And also actually people wanting to be very polite, and they give nice short answers instead of elaborating. So he came into my class. I didn't ask our test administrator at that point. I'd overheard it, and I already knew to sort of be on alert. So I brought him into my class. All of my other students were on computer at that point in another room, and so I just put him to work copying, which is in many ways kind of the first way to assess, can he physically write? Some of our students who were not literate, whether they come from a country in Africa or whether they come from Guatemala, if they didn't get taught to physically write, they usually are very slow. Their writing is slow and painful. So I watched him, and that didn't seem to be a problem. He copied everything off the board and did so pretty rapidly. He wrote pretty fluently in a physical sense. And so since my other students were out on the computers, it was a great opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with him to, again, try to figure out why our test administrator seemed uncertain about her assessment of him. So I asked him where he was from, and he's from Guatemala. Okay, no surprise there. And then immediately, the next thing to ask, if you're the teacher, is how much education did you have in your country? And he said 2 years of education, and then lights are going off, and warning, warning, can he read? Can he read? If he obviously could physically write. It doesn't mean he understood anything that he wrote, but he can physically write. Okay, so that's great. That's barrier number 1 has been overcome. He physically writes, which made me wonder if and assume that he also somehow, not necessarily in school, but somehow he had learned Spanish, that he was at least literate in Spanish. So I was kind of making that assumption, but wasn't sure whether I should be. But the next thing on my agenda was to figure out whether he could actually read anything, and certainly whether he could read English. So I grabbed the book that I usually use. It's a law book, brought it over, some simple sentences, and he read them quite well. I was amazed, actually, and this brought up more questions for me. I'm an interrogator. I dig. This is one of the things that people sometimes find very annoying about me, but can also be a good thing. I think in my teaching it's a good thing. It can also be a little intimidating for students, but I don't think it was for this fellow. Um, so he's about 30 years old. He can read in English, and that's extraordinary. Without any education, he said he hadn't. I was about to ask him how he learned English, and dig into that. And somehow he had learned how to read, and if you can read in English, to some extent, you must have been able to read something else as well. He knew how to decode words and pronounce them. And again, some of our students cannot do that. They look at letters on a page and it means nothing to them. They don't know they're supposed to associate sounds with it. So he somehow, with only 2 years of education, he had managed to do this. And so I started asking, well, how did you learn English? And he started telling me about an experience in Florida where he was put on an assignment with another guy who could only speak English, and at that point he could only speak Spanish. And the guy who he was working with, who could only speak English, wanted to learn Spanish, and so they began exchanging, I guess, or at least were very open to teaching each other as they worked. I don't think there was anything formal there about that. And so as I was having this conversation with him, I learned that he knows how to use do and don't. And this seems like a simple thing to those of us who've grown up speaking English, but in fact it's a very difficult thing for people who are learning English to catch on to. And he had already figured this out or learned this. And if you know how to do that, and he was doing it quite naturally, then you don't belong in my class. You belong in the next higher class. So he could read, and he knows how to use do and don't. And again, these things kind of put him in the higher class. But with only 2 years of education, I'm hesitant to do that. So I just continued to talk to him a little bit and was trying to figure out how on earth he could do this. This is a feat. This is a feat to be able to read in English, have only 2 years of education, and to be able to come here, and he'd been here for 4 years, and learn English to the extent that he could in speaking, to be able to write pretty fluently, and to be able to read. It's just... And he obviously had no conception that what he was telling me was on the extraordinary end of the scale intellectually. And so I kept trying to dig in there and figure out who this person was. And I got back to, I understood how he learned English, and I was trying to figure out how he learned Spanish. Again, if he could do what he did, then he must have learned Spanish somewhere along the way. And again, that's my assumption. And with 2 years of education, I thought, did your mother teach you? And every time I would ask him this, because I kept coming back to it, he would jump to Florida. And it's like, why does he keep jumping to Florida? Sometimes I can be a little dense. I should have caught on a little quicker, I think. And what I finally got was that, in fact, he didn't learn Spanish until he came to the United States. And he's not the first person to tell me that. And in fact, it's not uncommon among our Guatemalan students. And I know that many people, and certainly I did originally too, you see a small dark person and you just assume that they have learned that they speak Spanish. That that's their first language. Many people in Guatemala, their first language is actually a Mayan language. It is not Spanish. And their knowledge of Spanish can be, in fact, very rudimentary. So he came to the United States and he learned Spanish and English in 4 years. And he actually was teaching somebody Spanish to the extent that he knew it in those 4 years as well. And again, he actually told me the language that he speaks. I finally kind of cornered him and dispelled this notion that Spanish was his only language until he learned English. And he admitted, he actually looked a little sheepish about it, that he speaks a Mayan language. He told me the language, and I couldn't repeat it to you because I didn't retain it. That's how good I am. But so I got to the point with this gentleman thinking, you're one of those brilliant people, and that's exactly what I consider them. And there aren't too many that come through our program like that, but that's what they are. They are what I would call language acquisition miracles. And, he's learned a good bit of 2 languages in 4 years. And so, and even with that, you can't do very much in terms of showing your smarts. I can see it. His other teachers will see it when he gets there if he continues to come to classes. But if he's mowing your lawn, you're not going to realize it. And so I guess I would sort of ask people from my own background to at least open your mind to the notion that the person who is doing kind of a simple task for you may, in fact, be brilliant, may be extremely smart, but never had an opportunity to appreciate that about themselves, and never have been put in the way of an education that would develop it. And that's one of the things that actually drives me a little bit crazy in my work, is that I do see these folks come through, sometimes quite young. They may not be able to look at a map and tell you where China is, but they've got the smarts. It's in there. They've got the smarts, and to an extreme extent, and yet they're locked. There's nothing they can do about it. There's nothing they can do about it. So there's no way to develop it. There's no way to unleash it for the rest of us to take advantage of. They can use it in their lives, and that's kind of the end of it. Drives me crazy, but that's life. Hope you've all had a great day. Thanks for listening.